I had exactly $43,000 left in my account when I discovered my cousin had stolen $2.4 million from our grandmother's estate. The cream-colored envelope sat on my kitchen table, postmarked 3 weeks earlier, forwarded twice because I'd been too weak after surgery to check my mail. Inside was a single page, my grandmother's spidery handwriting on aged stationery. If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. Check the ledger. Trust Mr. Hendricks. He knows everything. My hands trembled, not just from the lingering effects of the anesthesia, but from the cold recognition that someone had been planning something while I was most vulnerable. The ledger she mentioned, a burgundy leather book I'd seen in her study as a child, was supposedly lost after her funeral 8 months ago. But the lawyer's name, Hendricks, that was new. Or perhaps I'd simply never paid attention. Let me take you back to the moment everything I thought I knew about family loyalty shattered like antique glass. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 2 weeks after my emergency appendectomy. I was still moving slowly, still taking pain medication, still sleeping 14 hours a day. My phone buzzed against the nightstand, and I fumbled for it with clumsy fingers. Ms. Hartwell? A woman's voice, professional, clipped. This is Jennifer Oakes from Richland Estate Management. We need you to come in and sign the final disbursement papers for your grandmother's estate. If you don't sign by Friday, the remaining funds will default to the primary beneficiary. I blinked against the afternoon light filtering through my bedroom curtains. What remaining funds? I thought everything was settled months ago. There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. According to our records, there's approximately $180,000 in a secondary trust that requires both beneficiaries' signatures. Your cousin Diane has already signed. We just need yours. My stomach clenched. Diane told me there was nothing left after the funeral expenses and estate taxes. Another pause, longer this time. Ms. Hartwell, perhaps you should come in and review the documents yourself. The office was in downtown Charleston, a historic building with crown molding and floors that creaked with authority. I moved slowly, still favoring my right side, still feeling the pull of healing tissue beneath my clothes. The receptionist directed me to a conference room where manila folders were spread across a mahogany table like evidence at a crime scene. Jennifer Oakes was younger than I'd imagined, maybe 30, with sharp eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses. She slid a document toward me. This is the disbursement request filed 6 months ago. I scanned the page, my vision still occasionally blurring from the medication. There, in neat typescript, was a list of assets. The house, sold. The investment accounts, liquidated. The artwork collection, auctioned. Total estate value, $2.7 million. My grandmother had been frugal her entire life, a retired art history professor who lived simply but invested wisely. I'd expected maybe $500,000, not this. Where did it all go? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jennifer pulled out another document. According to the executor's report filed by your cousin, estate taxes took $890,000. Funeral and legal expenses, $410,000. The house required extensive repairs before sale, another $200,000. The numbers swam before my eyes. That's over $1.5 million in expenses? She nodded slowly. Which is why I called you. These figures seemed unusually high to our compliance department. We're required to flag any estate disbursement where expenses exceed 50% of the total value. I felt something cold settle in my chest, something that cut through the fog of pain medication with crystalline clarity. You're saying you think something's wrong? Jennifer leaned forward slightly. I'm saying you should review these documents very carefully before you sign anything, and perhaps consult your own attorney. I gathered the papers with shaking hands, the pages heavy with implications I was only beginning to understand. As I stood to leave, Jennifer added quietly, Your grandmother was my art history professor at the College of Charleston. She was a remarkable woman. She deserved better than this. That night, I couldn't sleep despite the exhaustion pulling at my bones. I sat at my kitchen table with the documents spread before me, a legal pad filling slowly with notes and questions. The funeral expenses, $87,000 for a simple service and burial. The legal fees, $143,000 for what should have been a straightforward estate. The house repairs, $200,000 for a property that had been meticulously maintained. Every number felt inflated, distorted, wrong. My phone rang just past midnight, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the green button. Ms. Hartwell, this is Robert Hendricks. I apologize for the late hour, but I understand you received your grandmother's letter. The voice was elderly, southern, carrying the weight of careful pronunciation. I've been waiting for you to surface. My heart hammered against my ribs. You're the lawyer she mentioned. I was your grandmother's personal attorney for 37 years, he said. I did not handle her estate, which troubled me greatly. 3 months before she passed, she came to my office with concerns. She believed someone was pressuring her to change her will, to simplify the beneficiary structure. She refused, but she was frightened. I gripped the phone tighter. Who was pressuring her? Your cousin Diane had moved into the house, ostensibly to provide care during your grandmother's final illness, but your grandmother felt watched, controlled. She couldn't prove anything, but she knew something was wrong. His voice dropped lower. So we made a contingency plan. She gave me copies of her original estate documents, unaltered. She also recorded a video deposition explaining her wishes and her concerns. She instructed me to hold everything unless you specifically contacted me using a phrase only you would know. I felt tears prickling behind my eyes. What phrase? She said you'd mentioned the ledger, the burgundy one from her study. She said that book contained records of every major financial decision she'd made for 40 years. She said if anything happened, you'd need to find it. The ledger. The mysterious ledger that had supposedly been lost. Mr. Hendricks, I don't have it. No one's seen it since she died. He made a soft sound, something between a sigh and a hum of satisfaction. Then I suggest we meet tomorrow, because I know exactly where it is. The law office was in an older part of Charleston, the kind of building that predated air conditioning and still relied on high ceilings and ceiling fans for comfort. Robert Hendricks was in his 80s, impeccably dressed in a seersucker suit despite the March chill, with eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He gestured me to a leather chair and placed a burgundy book on the desk between us. The ledger. Your grandmother gave this to me for safekeeping 2 months before she died, he said, his fingers resting lightly on the worn cover. She suspected Diane might try to destroy it. I reached for it with reverent hands, opening to pages filled with my grandmother's meticulous handwriting. Dates, amounts, institutions, account numbers. 40 years of financial history, organized, documented, undeniable. Mr. Hendricks placed a second item on the desk, a USB drive. The video deposition, recorded in this office, notarized, legally binding. She explains her estate plan, names you and Diane as equal beneficiaries, and explicitly states that certain assets, including her art collection and a portion of her investment portfolio, were to be held in trust for a charitable foundation she planned to establish. I looked up sharply. What charitable foundation? The Hartwell Arts Education Foundation. She'd been planning it for years, wanted to provide scholarships for underprivileged students studying art history. She'd already allocated $1.2 million for the initial endowment. His expression hardened. None of which appears in the estate settlement documents. The room seemed to tilt slightly. $1.2 million simply vanished. Diane filed as executor. She controlled everything. She did, Mr. Hendricks agreed. But she did so using a will that I believe was altered after your grandmother became too ill to understand what she was signing. The original will, which I have here, shows very different instructions. And if we can prove the filed will was forged or executed under duress, everything that's been done can be reversed. I felt something inside me shift, from grief and confusion into something harder, clearer. What do we need to prove it? He smiled, a thin, satisfied expression. We need a forensic handwriting analyst, which I've already retained. We need to file a formal challenge, which I can draft today. And we need you to be very, very careful, because once we begin this process, your cousin will know she's been caught. I spent the next week moving through my recovery in a strange dual reality. On the surface, I rested, saw my doctor for follow-up appointments, slowly regained my strength. Beneath, I met with Mr. Hendricks, reviewed documents, signed affidavits, watched my grandmother's video deposition 3 times until I could recite her words by heart. She sat in that same leather chair, looking frail but determined, her voice steady despite the oxygen cannula beneath her nose. "I want my legacy to matter," she said directly to the camera. "I want young people who love art the way I loved art to have opportunities I never had. If something happens to me before I can establish the foundation myself, I trust my granddaughter Eleanor to carry out my wishes. She understands what art means, what education means, what legacy really is." Tears streamed down my face every time I watched it. Not just from grief, but from rage at what had been stolen. Not just from me, but from dozens of students who would never receive those scholarships. From a community that would never benefit from her generosity. The forensic handwriting analyst, a woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, spent 4 days examining the documents. When she finally called Mr. Hendricks with her preliminary findings, I was sitting in his office, my hands clenched in my lap. He listened, asked several technical questions, then thanked her and ended the call. He looked at me with something like grim satisfaction. "The signature on the revised will shows evidence of simulation, someone copying your grandmother's signature slowly and carefully rather than signing naturally. The tremor patterns are wrong for someone with her documented medical conditions. Additionally, the notary stamp is from a provider who had their license suspended 2 months before the date on the document." I felt my breath catch. "So it's definitely forged." "Dr. Chen will testify to that effect, yes, which means we have grounds not just for a civil challenge, but for a criminal fraud investigation." He paused, letting that sink in. "Eleanor, once we file these motions, there's no going back. Your family relationships will be permanently fractured. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about my cousin Diane, 3 years older than me, always the favored one, always the successful one. She'd been a pharmaceutical sales representative, made good money, drove a new car every 2 years. But she'd also been envious of the time I'd spent with our grandmother, of the shared love of art and history that had bonded us. I remembered Diane visiting the hospital after my surgery, her face arranged in concern, asking if I needed anything. I'd thought it was kindness. Now I wondered if she'd been checking to see how incapacitated I was, how easy it would be to slip the final estate papers past me while I was too weak to question them. "I'm prepared," I said quietly. "My grandmother trusted me to protect her legacy. I won't let her down." Mr. Hendricks nodded once, decisive. "Then we file tomorrow." The motion to contest the will hit the probate court on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, my phone was ringing nonstop. Diane called 17 times. I didn't answer. She left voicemails, her voice progressing from confused to angry to desperate. "Ellie, what are you doing? Why are you listening to that senile old lawyer? Grammy wanted things simple," she told me herself. "Call me back. We need to fix this before it gets ugly." But it was already ugly. It had been ugly the moment Diane decided her need was greater than her grandmother's wishes. Friday morning brought a text from my mother, Diane's aunt, who'd always played peacemaker in family disputes. "Please reconsider. Diane is devastated. She's done nothing wrong. You're letting grief cloud your judgment." I responded simply, "I'm letting evidence guide my judgment. If she's done nothing wrong, she has nothing to worry about." But I knew better. We all knew better now. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out, enough time for both sides to prepare arguments. Diane hired a prominent estate attorney, someone who charged $800 an hour and wore custom suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Mr. Hendricks, in his seersucker and bow tie, looked like a relic by comparison. But when he stood to present our evidence, his voice carried the weight of decades in courtrooms. and his arguments were precise as surgical instruments. He submitted the original will, the forensic handwriting analysis, the video deposition, the ledger showing assets that had never been accounted for in the estate settlement. He submitted documentation of the fraudulent notary stamp, records of accounts that had been liquidated and transferred in ways that violated the trust provisions. The judge, a black woman in her 50s with an expression that gave away absolutely nothing, reviewed each piece of evidence in silence. Diane's attorney argued that the forensic analysis was inconclusive, that the notary issue was a clerical error, that the video deposition was made when my grandmother was already mentally compromised by illness and medication. Mr. Hendricks played the video right there in the courtroom. My grandmother's voice filled the space, clear and determined. I am of sound mind and body. I understand exactly what I'm doing and why. My assets are to be divided equally between my granddaughters, with specific allocations for the charitable foundation I intend to establish. Anyone who tells you differently is lying. The courtroom went silent. The judge looked at Diane, who sat pale and rigid beside her expensive attorney. Ms. Vaughn, the judge said carefully, do you have an explanation for the discrepancies between this video testament and the will you submitted for probate? Diane's attorney started to speak, but the judge held up one hand. I asked Ms. Vaughn. Diane's voice came out thin and strained. My grandmother changed her mind in her final weeks. She wanted things simpler. She told me herself. And yet there's no documentation of this change of heart, the judge observed. No witnesses to these conversations, no written instructions, just your word against a notarized video deposition. She paused, then delivered the words that would change everything. I'm freezing all assets pending a full investigation. Criminal fraud charges may be forthcoming. This hearing is adjourned. I walked out of that courtroom feeling like I'd been physically lighter, like some weight I'd been carrying for months had finally lifted. Mr. Hendricks touched my elbow gently. Well done. Now comes the harder part. Harder than that? I asked, surprised. He smiled faintly. Now you have to rebuild what she tore down. The foundation, the trust, the legacy. That's not a legal battle. That's a labor of love. He was right, of course. Over the next 6 weeks, as the criminal investigation proceeded and the assets remained frozen, I began the real work. I met with the college's arts department, with scholarship coordinators, with the community organizations my grandmother had supported quietly for decades. I learned that she'd been planning the foundation for years, that she'd discussed it with colleagues and friends, that everyone who'd known her expected it to happen. Diane had stolen not just money, but dreams, possibilities, futures. The weight of that theft was somehow worse than the financial crime itself. The criminal charges were filed in May, fraud and forgery, with potential prison time if convicted. Diane's expensive attorney negotiated a plea deal, restitution plus probation, no jail time if she cooperated fully with asset recovery. She agreed, probably because the alternative was far worse. The money started coming back in pieces. An account here, some liquidated stocks there, the proceeds from the artwork sales that she'd pocketed instead of reporting. In total, we recovered $1.9 million of the original $2.4 million. The rest was gone, spent on Diane's lifestyle upgrades over the past 8 months, things that couldn't be easily clawed back. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something. The foundation was established officially in June. The Hartwell Arts Education Foundation, with a mission statement written partially by my grandmother before she died, and completed by me with the help of the college's provost. We funded 5 scholarships in the first year, full rides for students who showed exceptional promise but lacked financial resources. The gala was scheduled for September, a fundraiser to support the foundation's expansion and to celebrate its official launch. We held it at the Gibby's Museum of Art, my grandmother's favorite place in Charleston, surrounded by the paintings and sculptures she'd spent her life studying and teaching others to love. I wore a deep blue dress, simple and elegant, my grandmother's pearl earrings my only jewelry. The room filled with donors, art lovers, former students, and colleagues who'd known and respected her work. I stood near the entrance greeting guests, my heart full of complicated emotions, pride and grief and satisfaction all tangled together. Then Diane walked in. I hadn't expected her. The plea deal didn't forbid her from attending public events, but I'd assumed she'd have the grace to stay away. She wore black, severe, and expensive, her face carefully made up to hide the strain of the past 6 months. She approached me directly, ignoring the startled looks from nearby guests. "Eleanor," she said quietly, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "I wanted to see what you built with the money you took from me." I felt the room's energy shift, people turning to watch, sensing conflict. I kept my voice calm, steady, the way Mr. Hendricks had taught me to speak in depositions. "I built what Grammy intended. You're welcome to stay and see exactly where her legacy is going." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You always were her favorite, Saint Eleanor, who understood art, who cared about beauty and culture and all those useless things, while some of us lived in the real world, dealing with real problems. Problems like how to steal $2.4 million from a dying woman." The words came out quiet but cutting, and I watched her flinch. Several guests gasped, not bothering to hide their reactions now. Diane's face flushed dark red. I needed that money. I had debts, obligations. She had more than she could ever use. It wasn't theft, it was practical. "It was forgery," I corrected, still keeping my tone even and factual. "It was fraud, and it was betrayed." I paused, then added more gently, "You could have just asked, Diane. If you'd been honest about your financial situation, maybe we could have worked something out. But you chose to lie, to forge documents, to steal from someone who trusted you. That wasn't practical. That was cruel." Tears welled in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were genuine remorse or frustration at being caught. "You'll never forgive me," she whispered. "No," I agreed quietly. "I won't. But Grammy might have. She was better at forgiveness than I am." Before Diane could respond, Mr. Hendricks appeared at my elbow, his presence both gentle and unmovable. "Ms. Vaughn," he said with exquisite courtesy, "I believe it would be best if you left now. This event is for donors and supporters of the foundation. Your presence is neither appropriate nor welcome." Diane looked between us, her face working through several emotions before settling on resignation. She turned and walked out without another word, her heels clicking sharply against the museum's marble floors. The gala continued, a beautiful evening of speeches and music, and the unveiling of our first scholarship recipients, 5 young people whose faces glowed with gratitude and possibility. I spoke briefly, reading from notes because I didn't trust myself to remember the words through the emotion. My grandmother believed that art wasn't decoration, it was sustenance. She believed that understanding beauty made us more human, more compassionate, more connected to each other and to history. She wanted that gift shared as widely as possible, particularly with young people who might never otherwise have access to it. This foundation is her voice, continuing to teach, continuing to inspire, continuing to insist that culture matters, that beauty matters, that education matters. Thank you all for helping carry that message forward. The applause was warm and sustained, and in that moment I felt my grandmother's presence so strongly it was almost physical, as if she were standing beside me, her hand on my shoulder, her voice in my ear saying, "Well done, sweetheart. Well done." 1 year later, the foundation had grown beyond anything I'd imagined in those first difficult months. We'd funded 12 scholarships, established an artist-in-residence program at the college, and created a grant system for public schools to bring art education to underserved communities. The money Diane had stolen and that we'd recovered had become something far more valuable than mere dollars. It had become opportunity, hope, transformation. I received occasional updates about Diane through family channels, carefully maintained at arm's length. She'd moved to Atlanta, taken a job with lower pay but less stress, was reportedly working to rebuild her life and reputation. I felt neither satisfaction nor sympathy about that. She'd made her choices, faced her consequences, and now she'd live with them. That was justice, and justice didn't require my emotional investment. I learned something crucial through that entire experience, something I wished I'd understood earlier, but am grateful to know now. Betrayal doesn't just damage trust between people. It damages the betrayer's relationship with themselves, their sense of who they are and what they're capable of. Diane will carry what she did for the rest of her life, and no punishment imposed by courts or family could be heavier than that internal weight. My grandmother taught me to love beauty, but she also taught me something more fundamental, that integrity isn't convenient, it's essential. That legacy isn't about what you leave behind, but about what you build that can continue growing after you're gone. That family is defined not by blood, but by who shows up, who tells the truth, who honors their commitments even when it's difficult. I think about her every time I visit the museum, every time I meet one of our scholarship recipients, every time someone tells me a story about how her teaching changed their life. She's gone, but she's not finished. Her voice continues in every student we support, every artist we encourage, every person who learns to see the world more clearly through the lens of art and history. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and keeping your integrity? Have you ever had to fight for something not because it benefited you personally, but because it was right? Those are the moments that define us, not the easy choices, but the hard ones, the ones that cost us relationships and comfort, and the illusion of family harmony. If my story resonated with you, I'd love it if you'd subscribe to this channel. There are more stories coming, more battles fought and won, more lessons learned the hard way. Thank you for listening.